This is my video to introduce a new series I'm going to be kind of adding to periodically as I watch movies that I feel like I would like to do this with. I know this isn't really writing related so much from the onset, but I'm going to be kind of making it writing related because of the large things I'm going to be talking about in these movies that I'm going to be kind of reviewing is the storytelling techniques, the character development, those kind of things, which are all things that you may want to consider in writing. And also, I'm going to be basically rating these movies on a scale of first draft, second draft, third draft, or publishable. Because if they were a book, and they were a book that was written the way the movie is, because some of these may have been books first before they were movies, but you know how movies are always a little bit different than the books, or a lot different than the books. Whether or not those books would have been a good book if the movie had been a book. So without further ado, we're going to jump into that because this is kind of a long video, and before we get started, I am going to give you some forewarning. I swear like a sailor in this, so if you don't like swear words, yeah, there's a lot of those. So you may want to just not bother with this video. Also, trigger warning, because there is a lot of reference to sexual violence in this because of the film that we're going to be talking about. All right, so the movie that I had in mind is Split, and it's an M Night Shyamalan film. Now, please forgive me if I'm like saying that wrong or something. I like suck at pronouncing names. Anyway, this is a movie, I'll be very, very honest, that when I saw the trailer, I did not have any interest in seeing whatsoever. In fact, I wanted to avoid it like the plague. Because from the trailer, I could pretty much tell that there was going to be some stuff having to do with sexual abuse, and specifically sexual abuse of children. I could tell from the trailer. So I didn't have any interest in watching this movie. I avoid those like crazy. My hubby like begged me to watch this film because the new film Glass is coming out, and I loved the movie Unbreakable. Oh my gosh, so much fun. It's such an interesting premise, you know? I didn't want to watch this film. I didn't at all. I had my phone out ready to be distracting myself from the film during watching it so that I didn't have to like watch stuff. But so to give you the idea of what my predictions were for the film. Now, I am going to be briefly talking about the elements in the film that do have to do with that subject matter, because I was right from the trailer. I was right. And I hate when, anyway, I'm not gonna get into that. I'm gonna get into that later. We're gonna talk about that. But I do want to say I was absolutely wrong, because I thought it was going to be one of those films that just uses that kind of subject matter as like an easy plot device where there's just lazy writing essentially, and it wasn't. It was actually plot relevant, and it added to the story, so I'm like, okay, that's fine, use it. I mean, it's horrible. I don't want to have to like watch it or anything, but I'm like, you know, when it's plot relevant, you got to do what you got to do. You got to tell the story the best way you got to tell it. So anyway, with that out of the way, spoiler there. By the way, this is not a spoiler-free video. Just in case you happen to be watching this, there's going to be fuck tons of spoilers in this. So I wanted to talk about this movie because it vastly exceeded my expectations. Another kind of spoiler alert. You can like totally stop watching the video right after this if you're just looking for whether or not I thought it was good, because it was amazingly good to me. I did have to leave the room about 3 times, which is okay. It's just like those things where I'm like, I can tell this scene might go to a place where I don't want to watch it. I can't. Like, I'm just gonna excuse myself to the bedroom and wait for my hubby to tell me it's safe to come back in, that scene is over. I don't know why this film, I think it was classified as horror, but in my mind, it was really more like a thriller in a lot of ways, because there wasn't really much of a supernatural element until very, very close to the end. Throughout the entire film, you're kind of confused as to whether or not maybe these particular personalities that the person possesses, who has multiple personality disorder, I think they refer to it as something else in the movie. There's like 2 personalities that are actually the bad guys. And what I love about the film, so I'm just gonna kind of gush through this video. I'm gonna be very honest with you. I'm gonna be kind of gushing, but it's gonna be largely based off of like story techniques and character development, and why I think it was so freaking good. Because The main star of this film, there's basically two main stars. You've got the bad guy, who in a way is not the bad guy, which is so interesting and like so engaging. You got the bad guy, and he's a guy who suffers from multiple personality disorder, and he's got 23, although you learn later, sorry, spoiler, again, I already warned you about spoilers, 24 personalities. Now with this, out of the 23 personalities, he has 2 bad personalities that are the bad guys. But even them, one thing I gotta say about this film, like, if you're even like remotely cognizant when you're watching this, you developed an empathy for them, because technically they're actually right, even though they're like evil, like they're doing bad things. But they recognize that they're bad, but in their perspective, they have to do it because there's this other personality that's going to be arriving, essentially. And the other thing I really loved about this film, because I love films that engage you about psychological concepts. I know a little bit, not much, but I know a little bit. I'm in no means an expert on this subject. I know a little bit about multiple personality disorder just because I've kind of looked it up a little bit and researched it a bit in the past. It's very layman's like idea of the thing. But I love that they broached the subject that a lot of people think that multiple personality disorder doesn't exist. And the damage that was done to that particular thing, because it is extremely rare, like super rare, but it does exist. But the damage that was done was with one of the original cases that was more broadly studied and reviewed, is with Sybil. And a lot of people will know who Sybil is. But Sybil was basically later admitted to having faked it because she had other issues. And her therapist figured, oh, wow, I can make an awesome career out of this. Anyway, feel free to research that on your own time. But I love that this film kind of breached that, where one of the main characters, who's kind of the villain, but in a way I feel like a lot of empathy for, and I'll explain a little bit more why in a bit. His relationship with his therapist and how she's trying to prove that, yes, in fact, this is a disorder. These are the patients I've dealt with. It's a wonderful little back and forth. And I love that especially in this one scene, oh my God, and this actor did an amazing job. I'll try to talk about that more later if I remember. But there's this one scene where the therapist says, I don't think I'm talking to this person right now. I think I'm talking to this other person. And she's so smart. And eventually he comes out, she coaxes him out by basically playing to his vanity. And it's just brilliant on her part. But I won't give too many spoilers. Eventually, because he's lying to her saying, no, I'm Barry and stuff, and acting like Barry. And that's the thing about the actor. Oh my God, he did the part so well. I was just amazed, and I was so appreciating during the film how whenever he switched between the personalities, his facial expression would change, and you'd immediately know, even as the audience who isn't the therapist in it, what personality is talking now. But you'd be able to tell, it's like, oh, that's Patricia, like clearly by how the facial muscles are and stuff, like it's a different person. And it's like, oh, that's Barry, oh, that's Dennis, oh, that's Jade. Well, maybe not Jade so much, because Jade's one of the kind of side personalities. Anyway, that's the other thing we're going to talk about, is how they handled the switching of personalities. I thought was bloody brilliant and so unique. I don't know if it's accurate to how people who deal with this disorder actually handle things, and I don't know how it's accurate to that, because I haven't researched that. But I thought, as a person who's viewing fiction, that was a really interesting way to present that. Anyway, so back to the therapist in the room, and she's basically told him, I don't think you're this personality. I think you're this other personality. I think you're Dennis. And she basically coaxes him out into admitting that, yeah, I'm Dennis. And the dynamic between them is just really brilliant. Like, it's so good. Although all the time I'm like thinking, I I can tell like the therapist is being like slightly manipulative, and she knows that she has to present things a certain way as if she's almost reverent to these other personalities that are the bad personalities, but she's respectful to them, which is largely why they developed. Okay, so the other thing I found super interesting that I've not seen before, although I haven't seen this particular disorder represented very often, because I don't, like I mentioned, I don't usually like horror. And it's usually put under that category, or it'll be under strictly educational psychological texts or something, which I don't typically read into a lot. I usually find like the Cliff Notes versions of stuff on YouTube, and then I'll get interested and then I'll research the crap out of it. But this particular one, I haven't. So the other thing that I found really interesting about this particular film is how they approached how this character developed these 23, 24 different personalities, and that they appeared at times of struggle in this character's life, and that he developed them as basically a self-defense technique and basically a coping mechanism for things that he was dealing with at the time, because it's revealed that basically when he was a child, he had this like terribly abusive mother, and she was awful. And we're going to get into that later and how that affected his perception on right and wrong and good and bad. And I think that's bloody brilliant, but we'll get into that later. So anyway, basically it goes over in this that, oh, you developed this personality at this time and this personality at another time. It's not that you were born with these personalities. He developed them as basically coping mechanisms or ways of protecting himself. And I thought that was so ingenious, because I swear to God, this film was like, you know, the writing exercise, because this is mainly a writing channel. There's a writing exercise that's commonly done where you take a billion different concepts or ideas or traits or whatevers, and you write them on little things, you put them in a hat, and you pick 3 of them out, and then you combine those into a story. I feel like this story, if it had taken part in that game, was the idea of multiple personality disorder, mind over matter, and coping mechanisms or defense mechanisms. And they made it, like, M Night Shyamalan did such a freaking good job. Like, I'm so excited to see Glass. What was I talking about? I can't remember. Oh, the coping mechanisms. I feel like this film was one that like picked those 3 grab bag things and like made it into this masterpiece. Now I might be thinking this is so great because I was expecting it to be so awful and that it was okay, but I really love the psychological aspects of this film. Like, to me, it's like up there with Silence of the Lambs and stuff, which I loved. I love that film. And in fact, this is like going really far, but I think it was better than Silence of the Lambs because there was more that delved into the particular villain and their psychology. And Silence of the Lambs felt like it was more distanced from the villain. And this one felt like it was more like right in their mind, you know? Anyway, so the next thing I really liked about this film, I liked that they subverted a bunch of tropes. Now, this is kind of like more of a minor thing. So basically what happens is that there's these 3 girls who are leaving a birthday party, and you can tell that one of these girls is not part of the normal friend group, and you don't know why. And I like that. But the other girls are kind of like just popular, like whatever girls. You can tell I'm like bitter from my tone. Although throughout this film, you like kind of connect to them and you're like, ah! Anyway, but they do a good job of subverting the mean girl trope, 1. 2, the other thing is that they subvert the trope of like, there's the one person. Well, they also subvert the typical damsel in distress trope, which I freaking hate. Like the original damsel in distress where she's like lame and she just kind of waits for somebody to rescue her. And she has like no sense of self-preservation or like trying to do anything for herself. Freaking hate that trope. But I love like rescue scenarios or escape scenarios. So anyway, these three girls are kidnapped from this, I think it's a birthday party. I wasn't entirely sure. Anyway, two of the girls are kind of like girls from this other girl's art class. And you get the feel that this one girl's kind of like kind of messed up. Like, you don't know why, but you're like, you can tell she's a little bit emo and a little bit distracted, and she's not real personable and stuff. And you're like, oh, introvert, yay, just like me. Anyway, but there's all these other like more popular, almost like cheerleader kind of girls, even though they aren't, like they know each other from art class. They subvert the typical damsel in distress thing by, you've got these three girls in a room. And, well, one thing that doesn't really have to do with what I'm talking about, but one thing I love is that you immediately get the idea and how they hit the point that the one girl who's introverted knows something. She's got something special about her where she's just a little bit smarter than the other girls as far as dealing with bad situations. Because once they get kidnapped, they're in this room, and again, trigger warning, because this might be some subject matter that makes you uncomfortable, because I know it made me uncomfortable, and I was like borderline, I'm like, should I get up? Should I go out the room? This is gonna like make me have a panic attack. Anyway, when the three girls are in a room, the guy comes in as the one personality, and he sits there, and the one girl like adjusts her clothes a little bit because she knows they're immodest, and he says, you first. And like tries to drag her out of the room, and the one girl like grabs her and like whispers to her, it's like, pee on yourself, because she's noticed that the guy has like these OCD tendencies. So clearly he's not going to mess with you if you have like something that like a person who's afraid of germs, like kind of a germaphobe, wouldn't like. And she's smart enough to figure that out in like a second and tell the other girl to do that. And anyway, she does end up doing that, and he puts her back in the room, and he's just like, ah. Anyway, so in case you are planning on watching this film, just so you know, and you don't mind spoilers, don't worry about that scene too much, because I know that scene is stressful when you're watching it and you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's happening behind the door. Nothing happens because she kind of saves herself by doing something that grosses him out and like gets him to leave her alone. So anyway, don't worry about that scene. I love that it didn't follow the typical damsel like mindset where you just kind of give up and like wait for things to happen to you. And I love that the other girl who has lighter hair, so there's three girls in the room. There's one girl who has like dark brown hair, and she's kind of got a baby face like a little bit, and she's like the main character who like she's like really introverted, and you can tell there's something special about her. Like you can tell she's like the main character, and the other two are kind of side characters. So then there's the dark hair girl, which they refer to, who has, she's got a little bit darker skin and stuff. God, she's gorgeous. Anyway, like the whole film, I'm like, oh, she's so pretty. Anyway, I was like so jealous. And then there's the like slightly lighter hair girl. She's like not fully blonde, but she's like a dirty blonde. And you could tell like in her group, like she's the leader of the group, just by how she acts and stuff, which I love. Oh my God, the characterization and how they build these characters in this movie with so little actually being shown or said is like amazing. But anyway, so you got the blonde haired girl, and she starts talking about right after the dark haired girl is brought back. Sorry for the funny break there. My hubby interrupted me. He got home from work and we spent some time together. But anyway, I was talking about the blonde haired girl in it. Basically, when the other girl's brought back in after this like thing where the guy tried stuff and it didn't work out, she's basically pointing out, she's like, we need to like go ape shit on his ass. Like next time he comes in here, all three of us can gang up on him and we'll like defend ourselves and stuff, which would typically be a good idea. But seeing as the fact that I've seen the trailers for Glass, I'm just thinking, oh my God, this bitch is gonna like ruin stuff, like, cause this guy has superpowers, and that's all I know at the time. So I'm like, oh no, she's gonna be like one of those who's like, we're gonna do this thing, and then like she gets totally shut down and like murderized. Anyway, that doesn't end up happening, and I thought they were gonna like do that kind of trope where somebody tries something stupid and like gets themselves killed, and that didn't happen. However, there is a scene where, I'm not gonna ruin how because I don't want to be that spoilery, but basically she ends up getting out under some circumstance, and she ends up trying to run away, but she gets caught. And I don't know what happens like right after that happens, because I'll be honest, I left for that part because I have a pretty good intuition when it's gonna like enter subject matter that I can't handle. I left for that part and I waited for my hubby to like tell me from the other room that it was safe to come back in. So I don't know what happens there exactly. I don't know how bad it is, so I can't tell you how bad it is and whether or not you might need to avoid it if you have a problem with that subject matter like I do. Maybe it was nothing, like I don't know for sure. So she's kind of an interesting character. God, she's her and the other character, and they don't treat them like disposable characters, which was one of the things I liked. Like through the entire movie, I'm like, this bitch gonna die, but at the same time, I'm like, maybe they won't. Like maybe they're not going to. And I was like really, really like rooting for them to get out, which is like not common for horror films. Like if you know horror films, it's usually like the one girl who gets away. And this was the other trope that they subverted, because I'll be honest, like I'm a little bit biased because I tend to view popular girls as the ones who like sleep around a lot, because I was never one of those. But I'm a little bit biased, and you do get attached to these girls. Like they're not like the mean girls like that you fucking hate. You're like, yeah, kill them, like in a slasher fig. Fucking get them, I don't care, they're assholes. But you get really attached to them, and they do a good job of getting you attached to them. Especially since they never develop like the wimpy damsel girl, like, well, I'll just wait for the police to show up. Legit, like, interested in getting the fuck out of there. And I love that. And they did such a good job on even like the side character development on this in this. Anyway, especially the scene with the coat hanger, which I won't spoil too much. I know this is like a thing where I already told you the spoilers, but like the scene with the coat hanger, which once you watch this, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's just like so nerve-wracking. You're like, oh my god, like just a little to the left. Like, ah! You're like, oh my god, are you gonna make it? Anyway, but oh my gosh, it's so like sit on the edge of your seater. The other factor of this film that I really enjoyed, because we're gonna get a little bit off the side character girls and a little bit off the main character villain, which we're gonna actually talk about a little bit more later, but it's because he's kind of juxtaposed with this girl, the other girl who was kidnapped. The parallel that this movie presents, and I don't know if this was intentional. This could have very well been something that just I imagined exists in the movie, but perhaps if you watch this, you'll have a greater appreciation for the movie if you watch it. But the parallel that they present between the one kidnapped girl and the bad guy, because as I mentioned earlier, they basically present the multiple personalities that this guy has developed as coping mechanisms and defense mechanisms that he developed given to hard situations in his life, which I thought was really cool and interesting. But then they have this girl who's also gone through something traumatic, because I'm going to be honest with you. Now, again, trigger warning as far as sexual abuse topics go. You basically find out that this girl has the cliche creepy uncle trope. There's some scenes where it's like kind of obvious that like some stuff's going to happen that I don't want to watch or have in my brain when I'm trying to go to bed. So I left for those. So I don't know how bad it actually got or how explicit it got. Given the fact that it's M Night Shyamalan, I'm going to say not super explicit. It kind of leaves, I'm guessing it leaves a little bit more to your imagination and stuff. And there is a scene that my hubby told me about, but I wasn't there for, that we're going to discuss more that kind of mirrors to the end of the movie. Basically, you find out that she has a creepy uncle. Let's say it that way. But anyway, and it's kind of like on a hunting trip type situation. So she has, this is my understanding, because I actually wasn't there for that scene. I like friggin' left and like was watching other YouTube videos to drown out any noise from the other room. But I'm going off of what my hubby told me. But basically, at some point, she gets a hold of a shotgun. So you know that she knows from a young age how to shoot. And she used to be taken on hunting trips with her dad. So she knows how to use a gun. She's like not like a wussy girl. Like she's kind of a tomboy. She's kind of tough, which we'll talk about a little bit of a character discrepancy with that in a little bit, which was one of my only complaints about this particular movie. But anyway, there's a scene where she basically like points the gun at the creepy uncle, and basically he's like, are you gonna kill me type thing. And she doesn't. She actually like kind of chickens out of it. But she's like a little kid. And that kind of mirrors to the end of the film where she has a gun that she's gotten a hold of for the bad guy. and she fucking shoots him. And it's kind of like her redemption from that situation where she didn't have the strength to do it before for somebody who was hurting her. And then at the end, she did, and she developed that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the end of the film a little bit later. But I loved that point. I thought that their development of her was very interesting, especially how, like, at the beginning, she seems kind of standoffish and she's not being friendly with the other girls, even though they, like, invited her to this party and stuff, and she's just being standoffish. And also, like, in the one scene, I'm just, dude, if a stranger gets in your car, you get the fuck out. Like, you don't pause, you, like, do it in a second, like, friggin' react. Like, don't freeze up. And I'm like, I hate freeze up people. And this brings me to the other topic, which I'm going to be talking more in depth about. I really, really hate it to, like, the nth degree when they use sexual violence or anything along those lines as a cheap plot device, where it's just like a lazy way of showing somebody's trauma to explain their actions. For example, they could have done this with Clarice in Silence of the Lambs. They could have easily done it. She could have had a creepy uncle that she stayed at his farm or whatever and stuff and done that cliche. But they didn't. They did the whole, she saw the lambs being slaughtered, and as a child that was traumatic. And that's why she kind of developed this personality that gauged towards becoming a police officer who protects the innocent, which is a parallel to lambs being slaughtered. So the innocent being killed is a parallel to that. And that's how they developed that. And they didn't play on that trope. It wasn't necessary. They didn't have to do that. Whereas in parallel, another movie that actually did use this particular plot device, but it was necessary as far as I can tell, Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, which I understand certain parts were really, really hard for people to get through from what my hubby tells me. But her characterization, her whole motive in, like, the entire movie is based off of this traumatic event. And it makes sense as to how she progresses through the story. There's internal logic to it. It's not just, oh, we're going to throw this in there because we want to show how bad the bad guy is, which Game of Thrones frequently does. But at the same time, I kind of get why Game of Thrones does it, because it's to show, even in Game of Thrones, I don't think it's mindless. The only movie I'm thinking of that kind of, like, I'm like, you could have avoided this. You didn't have to put this in. That I actually, like, made it through and I didn't, like, leave, was Butterfly Effect. And I'm like, you didn't have to have that whole basement scene. Like, I didn't need to see that. It didn't actually play that much of a role in the whole plot and the play out of the movie. Anyway, but even Game of Thrones, when they have those scenes that make me wildly uncomfortable, which are, like, way too freaking frequent, I will say, but I see their point as to why they added them. They added them to show the marginalization of women in this particular culture that is in this world, and how they are essentially powerless unless they take the power, like Cersei did, or Khaleesi did. And then you've got Sansa, who, sorry, I don't know why the hell I can remember all these names, but I can't remember people I meet on the street. But Sansa finally, and this is going to play in later to what I'm going to talk about Split. Sansa is like a giant freaking wimp, and I kind of hate her until, like, after she has a horrible event, which I'm not going to lie, like, I missed work after watching that episode because I couldn't get sounds out of my head, and it was, anyway, we're not going to get into that. The whole Ramsay thing. Anyway, she basically evolves at that point as a character, and it shows that traumatic things can either make you toughen up or they can break you. And it depends on the person and how they handle it. And that's what why I wouldn't deem those kind of things as strictly unnecessary in Game of Thrones in a lot of cases, although other cases I'm like, you just did that for shock value. I wanted to go on to the next things. Anyway, the thing you need to know is that this character has a creepy uncle, and you find that out throughout the film. And a large part of the film, you're kind of thinking, it's like, you just did that for shock value. But by the end, I was convinced that that was actually plot relevant, and I'm going to explain why by the end of this video. All right, so the next thing I wanted to talk about that kind of ties into the last thing I was talking about, especially in regards to how Game of Thrones handled those things, as well as how this movie handled things. I thought this was so interesting and so subverting a cultural norm that I thought it was really brilliant. So throughout the film, the bad guy, the multiple personality guy, I'm just gonna call him Barry because it's like his primary personality. So Barry, when he's in these other personalities, like Patricia, for example, and Dennis, are referring to like the beast arriving, which ends up being his 24th personality. Sorry if you've made it this far, like, spoiler alert again. So they believe that when the beast arrives, they need to sacrifice the quote unquote, I think it was like the unpure young. And typically when the term unpure is used, it's usually referred to somebody who has had sex. And the pure is the virginal females, the nothing behind the eyes, doe-eyed dumbass. Anyway, bitter. But anyway, typically that's what's referred to as being pure or unpure, is whether or not you've had sex. And usually more in conjunction with females than males. They kind of don't tend to care if guys have done stuff. Anyway, but what I love is that they subverted that in his mind, that, and I don't know if, I'm sure this was intentional. Like this one I'm sure was intentional. And I haven't watched other reviews, but I'm kind of wondering if other people have noticed this too. In his mind, that because he's evolved basically superhuman abilities due to his own trauma, he views those bad things as being not purification by inexperience to certain events, like the other thing it suggests that impurity is, but to him it's more like the refining of metal going through a crucible. So you're impure if you haven't actually had anything horrible happen to you. And then if you have, then you're more evolved because you've survived that thing and learned to move on. And kind of like how he's learned to adapt. And by developing these other personalities, and he's basically become like this weird superhuman monster as a result. So, super spoiler, the two girls who've never had anything really bad happen to them in their lives, they die. Like, they die because it's a horror film. And it's got a little bit of a slasher element. Although, I will say, one thing I really appreciate about this film is that they didn't get super gory for, like, the purposes of being gory. In fact, they're not super explicit as far as gore is concerned, which I liked. I hate when they go over the top with, like, blood and gore, and it's just not necessary, you know? It's like, we get the hint, like, they're dead. Bad things happened. They got eviscerated. You know, we get it. But then the other girl who has bad things happen, like the whole film, they haven't shown you that there's anything that would imply to the other character, the bad guy, that there's anything special about her whatsoever. And through some hijinks, anyway, that's a nice way of putting it. Anyway, he's chasing her down and trying to kill her. So she's gotten her hands on the shotgun because of a really interesting scene, which I do not want to spoil for you because it's really good, where he does this rapid switch between a bunch of different personalities that are not the bad guys. They're the good guys, and they've been trying to reach out for help to like get, and you feel like this empathy. That's the other thing I love for it, is that you feel this empathy for the other personalities who are not these bad guys, but they're controlled by the bad guys. And you're like, I know that you don't want to do this. So the person in the body itself is not guilty of these things. It's these two personalities, well, I guess three technically, because it's like Patricia, Dennis, and the Beast, that are technically the bad guys. But even for Patricia and Dennis, like if you think about it, that must be awful having to be in a body where you've got all these other people and you've got to cope with this. Like, of course you go a little bit frigging crazy, you know? I love that. I just wish we could have seen more of the other personalities because there aren't the whole 23 that are shown in the film. But that actor did just friggin' amazing. You could tell, like within a second, with the switches of the personality, but the facial expressions. And that's gotta take some skill, you know? Anyway, we're moving on. So we're getting to the end of the film at this point. And one thing I want to point out that I don't know if it was intentional in the direction of the film or if I'm just imagining it. But this whole time you've been dealing with the one split personality guy, and it explains that he developed these split personalities through traumatic events and as a coping mechanism for different things that he's dealt with in his life, which makes him sympathetic in a way, even though he's really evil in a way. To me, like, honestly, Dennis is the worst personality because he's a creep. But even he knows that it's wrong, and he just has these impulses, and it identifies that even he kind of fights against those impulses, which makes him sympathetic in a way. They show this one character with split personalities, and I don't know if I'm imagining this, but you've got this other character who also has a very traumatic life, because as you learn, not only did she have a creepy uncle, but when her dad died, she got handed over to her creepy uncle. So she's lived with her creepy uncle up until this point. We can infer as to what that life was like. So you learn that she's like really had this bad life. Anyway, but we've got this one personality this one person who has all these personalities, which we learn he developed his coping mechanisms for abuse and problems in his life. And you've got this other character, and I don't know if this was intentional, but I think I noticed it, is that especially in one scene where she's trying to like kind of talk to one of the personalities who's a 9-year-old little boy. And she's trying to manipulate him into a way of getting them out of there, which I thought was brilliant on her part. She tells him a secret, because you know how 9-year-olds love secrets, like little dirty secrets. And she tells him, she's like, I frequently get myself in trouble at school on purpose so I can be sent to detention so that I don't have to go home and I can be alone. And you learn later she lives with her creepy uncle, so of course she'd do that. And she does these other things, which to me, sitting there watching, I'm like, that is suicidal. Get the fuck out of there. Don't do that thing. Get yourself to safety. But she's doing these things that are kind of like dispassionate about her own safety and kind of self-destructive, like getting in trouble at school. And then she has other times where she'll switch instantly to being like desperately trying to escape for her life. And to me, I see that as she has her own kind of split in personality, where she's got this self-defense personality that doesn't care really about her well-being because she's kind of gotten hopeless and kind of given up on getting out of the bad situation that she's in. And then the other personality that's fighting that wants desperately to get out of this horrible, horrible situation where she's sure she's going to die and desperately fights for her own life. And she kind of switches between the two. And I don't know if that was intentional, but that's what I imagine, and that it's a parallel between the one personality that had horrible things happen and her personality, and they're kind of working against each other. And they both adapted in similar ways, although she's much younger, so she hasn't had a chance to adapt these other mechanisms. And also his are far more to an extreme. But I thought that was really fascinating. And I don't know if that was intentional or I'm just imagining that, but I like to imagine that it was true because I thought it was really interesting. And then anyway, we're getting to the end of the film, and this is the last bit I'm going to talk about because this comes to the parallel of her with the creepy uncle and the chance to shoot him, and now the other guy who's trying to hurt her. Basically, he has become the beast at this point, which is, you learn it's got a touch of supernatural to it, because up until this point it was more like Silence of the Lambs, just serial killer-esque thing, to at this point he's basically developed superpowers, which is going to be important and develop into the new movie that's coming out, which is Glass. So she's trying to escape. She's found out that her other two friends who were with her are dead. They're dead. Bad things happened to them. Yeah. Anyway, she's trying to escape. And at one point I'm not going to go into that scene, but at one point she acquired a shotgun. And I believe she has 4 shells. It's a double barrel shotgun. So I think it was a double barrel. I can't remember. Anyway, she's got 4 shells and she's got a shotgun. So she's got 4 shots and she's escaping, and she uses up 2 shots totally ineffectually at all. Like, they don't do anything because she misses. That's one of my characterization issues with this film, is that it's like, you should know, don't shoot at that length. Like, shotguns are for closer range, or if you just want a wide spread because you're trying to get a bird or something. Anyway, because if you know shotguns at all, like, they start off really small and then they spread out like this because of the pellets. Anyway, she wastes 2 shots and then she only has 2 left. And the whole time she's like in this shirt that's kind of tearing off. And at the end she like kind of goes like fuck it, and she like takes it to get it out of her way and like tears off the top shirt that's like over this smaller shirt that like totally exposes her stomach because they gotta have like some sex cells. But the bad guy like comes up and he's like prying open these bars to get to her, and then he sees what she looks like without the shirt on, like that's covering things. And she has all these scars all over her body. And basically at that point, because you're sure she's freaking dead, she shoots the bad guy with her last 2 shots, but he keeps coming after her because he's got basically got superpowers. But that's the parallel to her creepy uncle, is that before she didn't take the shot. At this point, she chose to take the shot, even though it's a scary situation, and she chose to defend herself. So it's almost like the one mechanism was self-destructive and not willing to defend herself, and the other personality of herself is, and that's the one that was controlling the situation. And that's what I think is alluding to in the next scene, which I'm going to tell you about too. This is going to be the longest freaking video ever. This is going to be like as long as the friggin' movie. Anyway, so he's bending open these bars to this thing and trying to get to her, and he sees these scars and he's like, oh, I had you wrong. You are pure, you're more evolved like me. And he leaves her the fuck alone and he leaves. and it's because it's a wonderful case of internal logic for the character. And that's what I want to like emphasize here, is that to him, if you haven't been torn apart and had something truly traumatic happen to you, you're not achieving your true potential. You're not getting stronger from having to cope with that kind of thing. So that's why he considers the other girls inferior. But when he learns that this other girl, because he can see that she's like clearly been abused by these horrible scars she has on her body, which he finally sees, that she is more evolved, and he considers her an equal, and that's why he shouldn't kill her. And I actually love that internal logic. Anyway, we're going to try to wrap this up because we're getting to the end here, and I'm going to try to wrap this up to the end of the movie because, good God, this has got to be at least an hour-long video at this point. Last thing we're going to talk about is the final scene in this. So in the final kind of scenes of this, we're not going to go in the final scene that has to do with the bad guy character of it, because there's not really a reason. I don't have a particular reason. I like that scene. It was good. But I want to talk more about the girl who escapes. She ends up getting to this police officer, and the police officer in the car is telling her, so your uncle's here to pick you up. And we're just thinking, fuck that guy. Like, nope. Like, tell her there's a police officer right there. Tell her I'm not going with this creeper. He's like a creep. And they don't tell you that she did that. She's just silent. But you get the impression, and I want to say this is why I think this scene was directed so well. You get the impression that from her silence, the cop picks up on something, because it's just dead quiet. She doesn't say anything. She doesn't move out of the cop car that she's in. She doesn't do anything. She just gives her a look. And you get the impression that it's like, this is almost like a personality that she's developing right there. That she's got the personality who's willing to desperately try to escape, and she's like crying and stuff while she's escaping. You've got the self-destructive personality, and you've got this almost like a new personality that's developing in that scene where she's just like, fuck this. No, I'm done. No, I ain't moving from this cop car. I'm not necessarily going to tell you what's going on, but you can pick up by the fact that I'm hesitant after this situation, that I don't want to go with this guy. And the cop kind of like just moves her head ever so slightly, because there's been a long enough pause since she said, your uncle's here to pick you up. And the girl being like, just stony face, I'm not getting out of this car. And the cop's kind of like, there's something wrong with this uncle. So they don't have to explicitly tell you that she tells this cop, I'm not going with that guy. They kind of leave it open to your imagination. Well, sorry, M Night Shyamalan leaves it open to your imagination that she no longer goes back. She's not in this bad situation anymore. And then in a way, this horribly traumatic experience of being kidnapped, going through this horrible thing where these people died and this guy kidnapped her, and it was like really fucking scary, did make her stronger, and that she did develop in a way a kind of strength to be like, I'm not going back into that house. I'm not going back into that situation where I'm with my uncle. And And that's what I think was like really brilliant. Oh my gosh, the psychology in this film. I know it's a horror film, but I am going to say that horror films recently have been getting so much better. It's so much less slasher fic bullshit film. Anyway, that is my ravingly positive review about this particular film. I just wanted to say I genuinely did not expect this to be any good at all. I expected to hate this film. And I really liked it a lot, despite the fact that it had other things. And that's why it was, oh, I almost forgot to mention, that's why I think that the particular subject matter was plot relevant and it was important, because it showed that by the internal logic of the bad guy character, he was kind of right. That something traumatic, if you can get past it, and this is kind of a strange, hopeful message from this movie, that if you can get past it and you're one of those people who can and can move on and cope with stuff, that it can make you stronger in a way. That's the end of my review of that movie. I do want to say that, in my opinion, if I was given the choice of rating this as a book between first draft, second draft, third draft, totally publishable, like should be on the shelves, this movie was completely publishable. It should be on the shelves, and I absolutely condone giving it a chance. Even if you don't like these kind of movies, maybe give it a chance, because I usually hate these kind of movies. I'm going to stop yakking at you. You guys have a fantastic day. Hopefully this wasn't too terrible. And you guys have a good one. Bye-bye.